So let's say I just finished this beautiful website over here and I'm really happy with it, but I don't really like the colors and I want to change this orange that we have right here. Now, as you can see in my CSS, I'm using this orange in these 3 different locations, so you might be thinking that I have to go through and manually change each of these to the new color that I want to switch it to. Now, that would be pretty inefficient. I could also do a search and replace over the whole document in order to change every single one of these colors to the new color. But there's a more efficient way to do it, and that's with CSS variables. So CSS variables are kind of a new addition, a relatively new addition to CSS, and it basically allows you to set a variable at the top of your document and then reference it throughout your entire CSS, which is a lot more useful than going through and manually changing every single one of these. Basically, you just set it once and then use it throughout your document, and anytime you want to change it in the future, you just go to the top of your document and change the variable. Okay, so enough talk, let's see how it works. So, like all of CSS, CSS variables are cascading. So, if I want to put the variables at the very top of my document, I put it in :root, and then put the variables inside here. But, for example, if I only wanted to use it in the header down here, then I will put the variables in the header down here, and then the variables would only be able to be accessed inside the header. But I want to be able to use them throughout my entire document, so I'm going to put them in this root element. So in order to declare a variable, you use this -- syntax, and that basically means a CSS variable. And so let's say I want to set a primary color here, and then you can set it to whatever value. I'm going to change it to blue-violet. And then I can now access this color wherever I want with the var function. So let me show you how I can do that with this. Okay, let me replace this with var and then the name of the variable inside here, primary color. Close that, and then once I reload the page, it's now purple. So that looks good. And now, of course, I can go through and also fill out these with the same thing. And now, as you can see, everything is now purple. So anytime I want to change this in the future, all I have to do is go here and just change one value instead of the entire document. So that's pretty useful, but it doesn't apply to just colors. You can do it with any value you want, like padding. Let's say we want to set 10 rem, and let's say for the font size, we want to make it 150. And then instead of these values down here, we can just change these to the CSS variables, and it'll have the same effect. And now, basically all the styling that we would ever want to change is going to be up here in the root. I'm just going to add the other colors so we can change the entire theme. Let's say background, we want it to be white. And let's say the text color will be this off black. And then I can just go down here and change these. And now all these variables are set up here. Now with CSS variables, you can also overwrite them if you want to. So let's say we also want to use this padding right here, but we don't want to use the global variable that we set up here with 10 rem. That's a little bit much for this small little box. So if we want to, we can change padding inside here to 0.25 rem, 2 rem, and then we can use that variable down here, and it'll get this lower on the cascade padding instead of the higher on the cascade padding. So we can change this to padding, and then it's going to display the proper padding. As you can see, no change because we've overwritten it right here. Now that doesn't make as much sense for this because we're only really using padding one time, so it's probably more efficient just to put the value inside here. But if you had more and more elements inside this one, then it's useful to be able to access it with just one variable up here. Another nice trick that we can do with this is we can use media queries to change the variables at different screen sizes. So I have this page right here. It looks pretty good on this screen size, but whenever we shrink down the screen size a little bit, it looks pretty bad. So let's say on phone size screens, let's say at media max width 480 pixels, we want to add a media query, and we can change the CSS variables inside this as well. So let's say we want to go to the root, and on smaller screen sizes we want the padding to be, let's say, just 1 rem instead of 10 rem, and we want the font size to be 125% instead of 150. So as you can see, everything shrinks down on smaller screen sizes now. So that looks a lot nicer on smaller screen sizes. So that works a lot better than trying to write a media query for every single element that would need to be changed. So if I wanted to change the color, I'd have to write a media query for the anchor tag, the SVG tag, the CTA class, and so just changing it with the CSS variable is a lot more efficient. Another thing we can do with CSS variables is have different themes for, let's say we wanted to have a light and a dark theme, and I can overwrite all these CSS variables if we want to change it to the dark theme. So let's say I want to add this dark theme, and I want to put these colors in here, and let's say I want to overwrite the background color. So let's say change this to background. Let's change this to background color, and then let's change this to text color, and let's add the primary color as this value. And so I wrote a little bit of JavaScript that will toggle the dark class on the body. So basically this is saying on the body, if it has the class of dark, then we want to use these values as the CSS variables instead of these ones at the top that we declared before. And this is CSS specificity, so since we're declaring these lower on the cascade, then these will take precedence over these ones at the top of the cascade. So let's see if this works. I can click this and it toggles on the dark theme, since we now have this class right here, and as you can see, these are taking precedence right here, these CSS variables. And another nice thing is you can animate these as well. As you can see, there's a nice little clean transition right here. And you can just do that with this transition property with 200 milliseconds on background and color, so that we get this nice fading effect whenever we change the CSS variables. And another nice thing about working with JavaScript is we can change the value of the CSS variables on the fly with JavaScript. So maybe if we didn't have CSS variables, we would have to manually select every single element that we want to change the value of with JavaScript. But instead of that, we can just change the whole variable. So I'm going to open up this JavaScript that we have here, and you can change the CSS variables with this setProperty function right here. So in this JavaScript, I'm taking this link right here. If you're not happy with the theme, you can click this, and then what it's going to do is it's going to set the primary color property to light salmon, which is a nice little orange color. So I'm taking the document.document element, which is basically the same as the :root in CSS, and I'm grabbing the style and then setting the property right here. So whenever I click this, it should change the color for the primary color variable. And like that, it changes the color. And as you can see, JavaScript has changed the color right here to light salmon, and it's added it to the HTML right here, or the document element. So that's a nice way of changing the style of your website on the fly with JavaScript. It just makes it a lot easier than if I didn't have this. Of course, I'd have to document.querySelect, all the anchor tags, this border, this moon right here, and that would just be a headache and a half. Now the only thing you need to keep in mind with CSS variables is it's kind of a new addition to CSS. So it's not going to work exactly well on some old browsers. So for me, this website is targeted for developers. So I'm pretty sure almost all developers are going to be using a modern browser, so I don't really have to worry about them. But if you're making a website for boomers and you have to support IE11 or IE10, God forbid, then you may not want to use these. You may want to wait a little bit longer. Let's see, caniuse.com, and you can see how well it's supported. Yeah, so as you can see, it doesn't work at all in IE11 or IE6 through 10. or a lot of older browsers. So you may want to keep that in mind because you don't really want your visitors coming to the website and seeing a completely broken layout just because the CSS variables didn't work. So as a fallback, what you can do is above the CSS variable, you can write the actual value that you want to have here. So basically, if you're in an old browser like IE11, then it's going to read this background FFF and then just skip over this custom CSS variable because it doesn't understand it. And so you'll still end up with the proper background. Now, this is not a great solution. I mean, as you can imagine, this kind of defeats the purpose of CSS variables if you have to go down here and write it again. But you can keep it down here as kind of a comment to yourself, just saying to yourself, okay, this is supposed to be the background. I wish I could use CSS variables if I could, but I can't. So that's the kind of workaround that you have to do with older browsers. But if you are making websites that don't really need the support of old browsers, then you can use CSS variables to your heart's content. And most of the websites I build, honestly, are with CSS variables now. So I wouldn't worry about it too much, only if you have some special use cases where you're setting up a website for your local retirement home. But that's CSS variables, or I guess the official name is CSS custom properties for you. So if you found that useful, I'll be making some more videos about CSS shortly. So stay tuned for those. All right, bye for now.